Amy, thank you very much. Naira, thank you very much as well. I would say good morning to all of you, but I know we have watchers from all around the world, so I'll just say welcome. I want to thank Naira again for that kind introduction. He and I have been colleagues, and I certainly count him as a friend for more years than I can think of now. I'm going to try and condense 45 or 50 years of experience into 23 minutes, and that's always difficult to do. So my contact information is shown on the first slide, and I'm sure you can get it from AOCS. So if you have any questions about the subject in general or specific questions about a need you may have, feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to help you as much as I can. This world of Zoom presentations and the pandemic has put older people like me at a significant disadvantage. I'm at best a B+ Zoomer, and I hope this works out. You'll notice on the left of the first slide, my dog Cinnamon is here. She's always in here in the office with me, and she's here today to offer comfort, but probably no IT skills. There's going to be time for questions at the end of this presentation. When we get there, if there are questions, that's great. For those of you who have heard me speak before, you know that if I don't have any questions, I'll start asking the audience questions, and I'm not sure this is possible in this format, but I do have one bonus question to ask myself if it comes to it, so no worries. So the first thing I want to do is present this whole issue of water in a broader framework and focus on some impact factors, and then I'm going to discuss some of the details about what works in process wastewater technology, and then I'll get on to innovation and what I think is probably the next big thing in this business. So my experience in Africa, like many people in North America and probably Europe prior to 2015, was limited to some Tarzan movies on TV and reading articles about it. But that changed in two ways in 2015, or about then. I was contacted by a gentleman, a wealthy gentleman who had a business in Angola to help him with some challenges. And he's not in agribusiness. He's basically in the solid waste business. I haven't been to Angola a lot, but it caused me to read up on the whole area. Then the other interesting thing, interesting experience I had in 2015 is my wife and I actually went to Africa on one of these old people game watching trips, which was by far the best vacation I ever had, and I just enjoyed it immensely. We visited places in the Sub-Saharan, Botswana, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and we flew into South Africa from Atlanta. The flight from Atlanta to South Africa at the time was the longest commercial flight in the world. It was 17 hours, but we had to fly back through Paris, so I thought, well, this will be a lot shorter, but we flew from the south end of Africa all the way to Paris, and my conclusion after that is Africa is really a big place. One of the experiences I had during the game watching trip, I think the first day or the first week we were in the Chobe wildlife area, and we were on the banks of either the Zambezi River or one of its tributaries, and you look over into Namibia, and there's elephants in front of you and lions off to the left, and hoofed animals of every kind, and it's just a beautiful sight. But the thing that struck me the most is looking across the river into the delta and flatlands over there. It was cattle raising and farming as far as the eye could see, and it just impressed me that there's more going on here in agribusiness than one might think. So that's been an interesting for me to be able to go back to that experience as part of this. But one thought I want to leave everybody with, and I have to remind myself on the Africa is really big, is that it's very difficult to make generalities about Africa. Africa is a continent, it's not a country, it's a collection of large and very diverse countries and people. So when you talk about Africa, you have to be careful on generalities. So as I tried to figure out what the state of the industry and wastewater was, in Africa. I ran into this challenge in even a bigger way. There's not a lot of literature about what is going on in Africa. You have to break it down to countries and companies, and I found most of the major ag suppliers, the big companies, have a presence over there. Some of them have process facilities, but there wasn't just a lot of information about it. I found something similar on wastewater, that processing companies and soybeans and vegetable oils are doing anything from just nothing to having some very sophisticated water management systems. So I think then let's go on and talk about what is more important, and that's what's going to impact the future. We'll talk about these items and what's going to happen. Now, Bart Scholes of DeSmet talked on this same subject earlier in the presentation, and I went back and looked at his, and he had some interesting thing to say about this as well, particularly in the process technology and innovation. One thing I've learned over my 40 to 50 years in this is, as you look at the industry maturing in North America, and I believe you will see that in Africa, is that process technology and water management are rapidly converging into the same subject, because if you can't control the process, you really can't control energy and wastewater. And then I'll talk about transportation and external factors. But let's talk about water first. I did a little bit of research, and this statistic is about, I think, 5 years old, but Africa had 13% of the world's population and 9% of the water. So we're already starting out kind of with our position not where we would like it to be on water. Now, has that changed? Well, it probably has. Africa probably has more people now, and at least the southern part of Africa has experienced a severe drought, so water continues to be an issue. On the good side of this, soybeans are known to be a relatively drought-resistant crop. It takes about 400 millimeters of well-placed rainfall to develop a crop. Africa has an average, again, let's avoid generalities, but an average of 1,000 millimeters of rainfall a year, but that tends to be nothing in places and a lot in other places. So water will continue to be an issue. Now, if you get nothing else out of this presentation, I want you to remember this. This is a concept that I continually have problems getting across to management in large companies, and that is, if you don't put meal and oil in the wastewater, you don't have to worry about taking it out and treating it. The other corollary to this is everything that you put in your wastewater, not only do you have to spend money taking it out, but then you have to then you can't sell it. Everything that goes in there you could sell. Now, clearly there's a minimum amount that has to be dealt with, but step number one has to be process loss control and wastewater management. Most of the innovations in process technology over the last certainly 25 years have not been fundamentally new ways to process soybeans or wastewater. They've been better ways to minimize water and energy use. Transportation. Why is it important to wastewater? One of Naira's colleagues told me something maybe 10 or 15 years ago that I've hung on to, maybe longer than that now. And his comment is that in the end, the soybean business and oilseed is all about transportation costs. In the end, most of the plants get to the same technology level, and the company that has the most efficient transportation is the one that creates the most benefit from a financial standpoint. So transportation impacts the size of your plants. It impacts the harvest of crops. I noticed that Eric Lane, one of our speakers in the opening session, talked about transportation, its importance. And one thing I did observe in Africa is that certainly the transportation network of roads and rail is not what it is in other places in the world, and that obviously will improve with time. But all this ultimately impacts your wastewater, because if you have a very small plant and nowhere to discharge it, it's going to impact what you need to do. So let's focus just a second on external factors. And I'm not going to get into all of these, but they all have things to do with your business. And the common thing is you can't control a lot of them. These things are going to happen, and you just have to go with it. The final one is kind of my favorite. Who are these people? Well, 1,000 years ago, we called them invaders. 100 years ago, we called them colonizers. And today, we might call them innovators or investors. But they're people who see value in Africa or anywhere else where they are, and they're coming to see you and help you. I'm going to come back to that point more in just a little bit. So let's get some real number practical look at this for just a second. I have some numbers for what I'll call a typical 1,000 metric ton per day soybean extraction and refining operation. I've worked at about 200 of these, most in North America, but some around the world. And I'm going to show you what I think are some reasonable numbers that you might expect. And these numbers would occur after some sort of gravity separation for oil and solids. And these numbers do not include sanitary contributions or large clean cooling water flows. So this is some numbers that you might expect. Again, if you've got questions about your values, feel free to look me up and I'll give you some input on it. What about treating this material and coming up with waters that meet a discharge standard or for recycle? What's the most important thing? What have I told you already? The most important thing is not even on here. The most important thing is process control and loss minimization. But after that, the next most important thing is gravity separation for oils and solids before anything else happens. The one unique thing about gravity separated oil, it's the only component that gets in your wastewater that you might possibly be able to sell or reuse yourself. The rest of it is money down the drain. After separation, quite often we use a froth flotation technology with chemicals to remove residual oils. And then depending upon the discharge point that you're sending effluent to, you might look at biological treatment or final filtration. Again, a lot more can be said about these. So one of the other really key points I want to emphasize is when people work on wastewater treatment applications, they tend to spend 90% of the time thinking about treating the wastewater and 10% of the time thinking about the byproducts, sludge, and other residuals that come from it. I want to assure you should do it just the opposite. The wastewater itself is relatively easy to treat. Dealing with the sludges and byproducts is always the bigger challenge. If you see an equipment supplier or an engineer for those sludges and he gives you a drawing with a line going off the edge of the page and it says by others is you. So don't lose sight of these. I showed you just in this slide just kind of a simplistic from the left to right version of what something like this might look like. The photo on the far left is the incoming wastewater. It then passes through this dissolved air flotation unit. You can see the froth flotation on the top. And the picture on the right shows you the treated water. This particular facility is one of my pride and joys. It always works well. If you look at the finished water, you can actually see the mixer going down into the water. That's how clear it is. Now, in this particular one, we actually have a pH monitor on that final effluent to make sure it's within limits, and then we measure flow. And from that point, you might go on to a biological facility or whatever is needed for your application. So we have a saying in industry that if you can't manage something if you don't measure it, and that's true about wastewater as well. So these are the four parameters that I feel like are essential for managing any wastewater situation. COD is chemical oxygen demand. The final bonus question is BOD. What is it and where does it come from? BOD is biological oxygen demand. If we have time, I'll get into that. If not, you'll have to reach out to me. But there are other parameters beyond these that are of interest. Certainly metals and phosphorus and dissolved solids. But these are the ones that I usually use for controlling for parameters. So what if you need to get into biological treatment? This picture is a very interesting facility that we helped Fuji Vegetable Oil in Savannah put in. It's a activated sludge. If you want to know what a biological activated sludge looks like from a color standpoint, that's a good healthy one. This facility has a membrane filtration system, and that's kind of the next up and coming thing in industrial wastewater treatment that produces a water that's just very, very clear, and it can be used for tower makeup or even land application in certain crops. So what's the next big thing coming in the environmental and wastewater and sustainability area? I noted earlier some things over which you have no control. Climate change is a good one. The picture on your right is the Savannah Harbor at Savannah, Georgia. It's a site that I've been working on in vegetable oil refining since I actually started in the early 70s. And the Savannah Harbor is one of these rivers that had been in very poor shape, and over the last 40 years, through efforts of industry and municipalities, it's now very clean and has very good water. But it's just about that far from being perfect, and the regulatory community continues to seek perfection. And one of the things you find in life, of course, is that perfection is the enemy of success. So I have watched various state and local governments spend fortunes trying to make that a cleaner water. Now, one of the other ironies of this that impacts Africa and the rest of the world is that Savannah is now the fourth largest container ship port on the east coast of the United States. And the Corps of Engineers who handle rivers and harbors in our country are dredging the harbor and making the channel deeper so we can get even larger ships in. Why is that interesting? It's interesting because of what I think is going to be happening in Africa over the next 20 to 50 years. I think Africa is going to, and this is not just my opinion, but one you can read a lot of places, Africa is likely to be the next Asia. Why is that? It's going to be the site where industry moves to. They have substantial natural resources. They have energy. They have increasingly stabilized governments. And most importantly, they have labor and lots of it and a good supply of it. And this is going to bring this to your shores. So what does that mean? If you manufacture these facilities and or products and going to export them, that means you have to have ports to bring them into. So now all of a sudden, the East Coast ports of the United States and the West Coast ports in Europe are becoming the more important ones. All that impacts water, certainly in Savannah, Georgia. So with that, I'm going to close with a few thoughts. One of the terms we use, and I would challenge all those in Africa, is focus on the long game or the long-term business strategy, and don't get taken away by short-term money. The long game tells you to watch for this change and learn to manage it, or it will manage you. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Naira or Amy, I guess, for questions.
For your knowledgeable thoughts on wastewater and African processing. And any questions from anybody? I don't see any on the Google chat. I have one question for you, Mike, and that is, with all your experience, do you think the biggest impediment to better environmental conditions in Africa is improper handling of waste or lack of technology in waste disposal?
Well, the technology is there in some places for sure. So you really need to say what is improper. And it depends on whether you're looking at the long-term strategy or the short-term strategy. Improper handling usually means inadequate treatment, and that's a short-term strategy. In the long-term strategy, I think they would be well spent to invest more in wastewater and water management in general.
Well, I think you hit upon that topic in terms of improper when you said don't put oil and meal into water. And I think that if you read up and talk to people in Africa, they are more focused on getting the product out and do not, or at least that is my opinion, that do not spend as much resources or time in terms of avoiding those meal and water to get into the meal and oil to get into the water. And
Well,
I think
I
that
agree.
will go a long way.
That's not limited to Africa by any means, but I expect it's a challenge in Africa as well.
That is correct. It even happens in the US today for all the technologies you have. I see you smiling, so I know how you feel about it. So thank you, Mike. And we really appreciate your thoughts on it. And anybody has any questions, you can reach out to Mike or you can reach out to me and I can direct you to Mike, whichever way you like. And thank you so much.
Do I have time to explain DOD or are we at the end of the session?
Amy, do we have a minute? I think you can go ahead. It's 8:26. So.
All right, that's fine. So biological oxygen demand doesn't really measure anything. It measures how much oxygen is needed to degrade organics in your wastewater under certain conditions. So where did the test come from and why do we use it? We use it because we're hanging on to an archaic piece of testing. The British in the late 1800s were concerned about sewage from London going down the Thames River from getting into the and reaching the ocean, and the Thames River being contaminated. And the time of travel in the river was 5 days. So the British figured if everything was degraded in 5 days, or if whatever got to the ocean, nobody cared about anymore. So they developed a 5-day test. The reality is a 5-day DOT test measures about 60% of the chemical oxygen demand, which is the total oxygen demand. So again, I'll stop here and thank everyone. My contact information is there, and I'll be happy to help you with any questions or issues you may have. Have a good day and be safe.
Thank you.